One thing is, when I was in private practice, I had a client, and the client wanted things done, they had certain goals and they had certain interests that they wanted absolutely protected. And so you were more focused on your client. And a DA's job is to be focused on everything, on making sure that the defendant is held accountable, but that they're treated fairly, and they're only held responsible for what they did, no more, maybe no less. And then to make sure that the victim gets compensation, gets some sort of redress, but the victim is not our client. And sometimes victims disagree with us about what a sentence is going to be, and we can't make sentences stiffer in the cases where the victims, want more, and lighter in the cases where the victims are more forgiving. We need to hold the defendant accountable in the way that other similarly situated defendants would be held accountable in Santa Clara County. So we have an interest that takes into account both sides, which requires us, I think, to have that good relationship with the defense so that you make sure that they're bringing us all the information. It's so important that as a society, and especially in the criminal justice system, that we root out not only actual prejudice, which I think is, that's less of a problem, but even the appearance, so that everybody, because it's sort of this insidious effect, if it exists at all, then when a person of color feels that they didn't get a fair shake, it's always going to be in their head, is it because I'm a person of color? So I'm, one thing that's very important for me is to just make sure that, to the extent I can, that I be sensitive to that, and so that if there's ever an opportunity to root out not only obvious actual prejudice, which, like I said, I don't think is such a big problem, but the appearance of it. When I was doing elder fraud, it was funny. After I did elder fraud for 7 years, I wanted a little bit of a break, and I remember going to Karen Sinanu and telling her, I want to just do random acts of violence committed by strangers. Because elder fraud, and then I had done family violence before that, they so often involve family members that are taking advantage of other family members, or friends that are betraying friends. And what I found, and then especially with elder fraud, there's a lot of con artists. You deal with con artists. And, this is going to sound funny, but sometimes, a 211, a robbery suspect, can be refreshing compared to a con artist. I'm going to broaden it, not just con artists, because con artists are a segment, but fraud defendant, someone who is willing to betray the trust of a close friend for monetary gain, is one of, to me, the most least forgivable crimes. And I realize, I mean, there's obviously sexual assault and there's homicide, so I don't mean to be making some grand pronouncement affecting all, but there's just something uniquely despicable about that. Someone who will betray someone else's trust for monetary gain. There's something about working with seniors that really sets your priorities straight, because here's the thing. So when I saw seniors that had strong families, first of all, even if they were victimized by a caregiver nobody saw coming or something had happened, usually the family's there, they catch it, they've got a support system to fall on. And you talk to those seniors, and you talk to the family, and you find out that this was, a very loving person. They might have dementia now, they might have Alzheimer's, but they lived their life in a way that they fostered the relationships in their lives. One of my victims I had, she never was able to have children of her own, but she was the grandmother of the street she lived on. It was the neighbors that reported this landscaper who kept coming and wasn't doing any work and was always there. And so one thing led to another, and there ended up being a case that we prosecuted. So she didn't even have her own biological children, but she fostered relationships in her community. And in contrast, I saw people that amassed a great fortune in a very successful career, for example, but they didn't foster the relationships in their lives. And so then they get to be older, and if they become victims, there's not the people there to stand up for them, to take care of them, to step up and intervene. And I realized that, all the money in the world that you might make doesn't mean anything if you haven't also taken the time to foster the relationships in your life.